Welcome everyone to our online webinar on EMS hospital interoperability. Today is Tuesday, February 6th, 2024. Thanks for joining us. This meeting is being recorded. If you have questions, please enter them into the chat or raise your hand and we will unmute you. In today's digital age where data sharing and connectivity are paramount, the need for seamless interoperability between EMS and hospitals has never been more critical. Recognizing this need, our webinar today, led by our esteemed colleague, Josh Legler, will delve into the pioneering efforts of the EMS Interoperability Task Force and their remarkable progress since early 2023. Josh will guide us through the essential ways EMS providers can integrate into existing health information networks to facilitate sharing of vital data. And he'll also outline the steps EMS vendors must take to establish those crucial connections with health information networks, ensuring that participants leave with a clear understanding of the actionable steps needed to achieve interoperability. Josh, love to have you take it away from here.
Okay, thanks, Chris, and thanks everyone for joining today. As Chris mentioned, today's topic is on EMS and hospital interoperability. At least that's what I titled it. It's going to be a little broader than that. It's really going to be looking at interoperability between EMS and the rest of healthcare. So hospitals and other healthcare providers. And for the agenda today, here's what we'll be looking at. We'll look at how EMS providers can participate in existing health information networks to share data, what EMS vendors need to do to implement connections with those networks, how to find resources for establishing interoperability, and finally, a little challenge at the end to identify some quick wins for increasing the amount of outcome data that shows up in the national EMS database. So looking forward to that and seeing if I can get your help there. So I just want to start with a poll here off the bat so I can get a good sense of who we have on the call today. So this question is, what is your organizational affiliation? Just pick the one that is kind of your primary affiliation if you have more than one. So if you work for an EMS agency or an EMS provider, you work for state government, the health department, the EMS office, you work for a software vendor, or you're not really any of those, you do research with EMS data. And if you don't fit any of those buckets, we've got the other category. Well, I got about half of you answering so far. Okay, so it looks like we've got quite a few of you from state government, and then kind of an equal number from EMS agencies and from software vendors. So great. Cool, perfect. All right, we'll go ahead and Chris, if you want, you could go ahead and end that poll and we'll move forward. Oh, let's see, and there's a share. Okay, I just hit the share results. Maybe that'll show it to y'all. So yeah, primarily state government people, some EMS and software vendors, and a couple of others. All right. So as we talk about interoperability between EMS and the rest of healthcare, as I mentioned, hospitals are a key part of that, but it's not just hospitals. So this is really what we're talking about today when we say interoperability with the rest of healthcare. So EMS goes on a call, and they're going to treat a patient. So one point of interoperability that we're looking at is EMS being able to look up that patient in a network and get their medical history. Then they take the patient to a hospital. Of course, there are EMS calls where the patient doesn't go to the hospital, but if they go to the hospital, then they need to deliver their EMS report to the hospital along with delivering the patient. And then after the call, the question is, what was the patient's outcome? from the hospital. And so EMS needs some information back from the hospital, indicating some things about their hospital stay so that they can improve the EMS care that they provide on their subsequent calls. So various pieces of this are in place today. There are agencies around the country that have interoperability solutions in place. A lot of the interoperability solutions today are made through kind of point-to-point connections. So an EMS agency and a hospital, they got together, they agreed with each other to share data. Their vendors established a pipe between the EMS software and the hospital software, and they started getting data going one direction or maybe both directions. The problem of these one-to-one connections is they're not really scalable. We know that EMS agencies tend to transport to multiple hospitals, and hospitals tend to receive patients from multiple agencies. Excuse me. And so it's more scalable if you can use a network, and EMS can connect to the network, the hospital can connect to the network, rather than making these point-to-point connections with each other. A network is also essential if you're going to do the patient history piece. So if EMS needs to know something about the patient's medical history at the time of the call, then there's just, if they only connect to a single hospital, they're obviously going to miss out on all kinds of patient medical history. So keep that in mind as we go forward through this presentation, the importance of moving from point-to-point connections to utilizing networks. But I want to see where everyone is at today in terms of interoperability solutions that are in place. So let's pull up this next poll question, Chris, which is, do you have or do you offer interoperability in these steps of the workflow? Let's see, that's our first question. Let's see if we can get to the second one. Oh, I see. I guess we see all three questions in front of us. Question number 2 is the one that I'd like you to answer for this poll. Do you have or offer interoperability in these steps of the workflow? And this should be multiple choice, I hope. So if you're an EMS agency, I'm asking, like, do you have interoperability in one of these 3 stages of the workflow? If you're an EMS software vendor, then I'm asking, do you offer an interoperability solution in each of these 3 steps of the workflow? If you're a state EMS office, is there anything statewide that you have in place in any of these categories? If you're a researcher, you don't need to answer the question. Okay, so as the answers are coming in, it's about what I was expecting to see, that the biggest piece that's in place today around the country is EMS sending its report to the hospital. It's good to see we have a number that are offering or are getting hospital outcome data coming back to EMS, and just a couple that are getting or offering access to patient medical history. Great, thank you. Oh, whoops, yeah, the share results button. Let's see, there we go. Okay, so I want to, what I'd like to do today is, dive into these steps of the workflow and introduce what we have been working on in the EMS Interoperability Task Force for the past year. So the task force has met monthly starting last February, so it's been a year now. I've listed here the various topics that we've worked through on this task force. It's been a mix of EMS software vendors, software and vendor representatives from other areas of healthcare. We've had a few state EMS data managers on there. We've had EMS agency participants, kind of a wide variety of people. And we've really plugged through a whole bunch of topics on the task force about EMS interoperability. Today, I'm going to summarize kind of the findings or high points of a bunch of these topics that we've already covered on the task force. And then going forward, the task force will continue to meet for a few more months. We'll probably go till about the middle of this year. So for example, the next task force call is just coming up this Thursday, 2 days from now, where we'll be diving into the specific information needs that EMS has when they're receiving outcomes from a hospital. What is it they actually want to know from the hospital or need to know for their quality improvement efforts? So we welcome anyone to join the task force calls. I'll give you a link at the end of today's presentation to all of the interoperability resources, kind of a jumping off point on the NEMSIS website. And that'll include information about the task force and joining the calls. So what have we learned? Well, first, I want to cover some government and regulatory environment things. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly, and then I really want to focus the bulk of my time on the networks that I've been talking about and the options and kind of the path forward for participating in these networks for healthcare data exchange. But in the government and regulatory environment, a few things that we've established. One is that EMS providers and hospitals are permitted to share protected healthcare information with each other for the purposes of treatment, payment, or healthcare operations. We've also established that HIPAA does not require patient consent to share PHI for treatment, payment, or healthcare operations. In fact, HIPAA also permits sharing data without specific patient consent for public health, health oversight, research, and other purposes. So I think it's been well established, and the NEMSIS TAC has put out some great documentation with Page, Wolfberg, and Worth, really underscoring that on the legal and regulatory side, data sharing between EMS and other healthcare providers is permitted. The 21st Century Cures Act, I think that was 2016 is when that was signed. It prohibits something called information blocking, which is defined as practices that are likely to interfere with, prevent, or materially discourage access, exchange, or use of electronic health information. Now, information blocking is, they look at it as, is someone taking kind of a discriminatory action in information blocking. So say there's a hospital and they're sharing their data with some other healthcare providers, but not certain healthcare providers. This would be an information blocking issue. Or if they're putting up artificial barriers to accessing their data. So if an EMS provider requests electronic health information about its patient via a health information network, and then the holders of that information don't provide it, and they don't provide it in kind of a discriminatory way, the EMS provider may claim that information blocking has occurred. And there's actually a federal website where you can submit information blocking claims. Also, in the information blocking provisions, health information technology vendors cannot charge unreasonable or discriminatory fees for implementing health information exchange. So that could also be something that could prompt an information blocking claim. So that's the government and regulatory environment, just kind of the high points of things that we've documented there. But let's move on to data exchange partners, because really, as an EMS agency wants to get interoperability in place, then the question is, well, what's our next step? Like, who do we go to make this happen? So we've established that EMS vendors can connect to existing national health data exchange networks. Those networks are available to EMS. The networks, the cool thing here is they have what's called common agreements. And that is that all participants sign the same non-negotiable agreement. So instead of an EMS agency and a hospital talking to each other and getting their legal counsel involved and drafting up an agreement that they're going to share data with each other, that all goes away when you work over the networks, because the networks provide a common agreement. The hospital has already signed the common agreement, It was non-negotiable. They just signed on to it. And then the EMS agency can sign on the common agreement, again, non-negotiable. You adopt and accept all the terms in the agreement. I've read through these common agreements and they seem to not have anything that would be unreasonable from an EMS perspective or that would be hard for an EMS agency to comply with. So that's a real, I think, important feature of these national networks. Okay, going forward, the Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreement, known as TEFCA, is really going to be the future of health data exchange. And all of the predominant existing national networks today are TEFCA network candidates. They're going to probably become or have already become networks under TEFCA. So it means you're working with the same people, the same entities. They're moving under a different umbrella or a different framework. TEFCA is an effort overseen by the federal government. So it will be the federally approved way of doing data exchange in the future. And when I say future, I actually mean today as well. Okay, so I want to dive into this a little bit. I've said here that we have all these existing networks. They're going to move to TEFCA, all of that. So let's what do I mean by that? What's really going on here? I want to start by mentioning care equality. You may have heard of care equality. It's an interoperability framework for healthcare information exchange. When I say framework, what I mean is that it's not actually a network itself. Instead, it's a set of rules, kind of the rules of the road, the guidelines for health information networks to share data with each other. So care equality is the framework under which there are a whole bunch of what are called care equality implementers. So all these care equality implementers, there's a bunch of them. They've all agreed that when they share data with each other, they're going to do it under the care equality framework, that they're going to have a common agreement that's compatible, that they're going to use technical specifications that are compatible, and so on. Okay, so as we move forward, then I mentioned that TEFCA is the new thing. TEFCA will be the federal government overseen framework for healthcare data exchange in the future. So this is overseen by the Office of the National Coordinator for Health IT in the federal government. They've contracted with a nonprofit called the Sequoia Project. The Sequoia Project is what they've termed the recognized coordinating entity for TEFCA. They are the one leading the collaborative effort to develop the framework of TEFCA, which includes technical specifications for networks to share data with each other, to communicate with each other. It includes a common agreement, that's the CA in TEFCA, and it includes recognizing or designating qualified healthcare information networks, or QHINs. So what's happening is we've got a bunch of these network providers that are already in care equality, and they're still in care equality today, but they are now recognized, designated qualified health information networks, or QHINs. So the first 5 of those were just designated in mid-December, so just a month and a half ago. 2 more are in the process right now, Commonwealth and No2. They will probably be designated in the next month or so, and they will be among the first, this first set of qualified health information networks to operate under the Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreement. Now, how is this going to work in terms of, how do you plug into that? Well, here's what's envisioned for TEFCA, is that there will be QHINs. There's 5 now, soon to be 7. There's no limit that the federal government has set on how many QHINs is the right number. These QHINs, they're tested and certified on their ability to communicate with each other to share healthcare data. So then the QHINs have participants, and the participants may even have sub-participants. So as a sub-participant or participant sends out a query for some health data, they would send it to their QHIN, and as needed, their QHIN could then distribute that query out to the other QHINs. The other QHINs can distribute those queries down to their participants and even sub-participants, get responses back and send the data back over those QHIN to QHIN connections and back to the original requester. These participants in the QHINs, they could be that it hasn't been defined or limited as to who they could be or what kind of entity they could be. They could be health information exchanges that are operating at, say, a state level. They could also be software vendors who have partnered with a QHIN. They can be healthcare organizations. So oftentimes, like a large hospital system, that hospital system might be a participant directly with the QHIN. So that's open to see where the market goes. For that reason, then, as we think about how EMS would connect with the QHINs, then it's open. It's an open question. So an EMS agency, they could sign up with a QHIN directly, and then they could instruct their software vendor to connect to that QHIN. Maybe that might work for a large EMS agency. I think as we look at the agencies that do 50 calls a year out in all the rural areas of the US, I think that becomes a lot less reasonable for an agency like that to directly sign up with a QHIN. But an EMS software vendor can sign up with a QHIN. And so we've seen some of that happening where the vendor makes the agreement with the QHIN and then can provide that QHIN connectivity to their customers, the EMS agencies. So that's a path forward that I think we're going to see more of going forward. But there have also been even other suggestions or people saying, well, what about this? So a state EMS office or a state health department, yeah, they could potentially be, they could sign up with a QHIN. Some people have even said, well, why doesn't the US Department of Transportation sign up with a QHIN and provide some kind of connectivity umbrella for all of EMS. So there's been all kinds of suggestions, and this is still kind of that open question. But personally, I think we're going to tend to see a lot of movement with EMS vendors signing up with the QHINs, implementing their technical requirements, and then offering that service to their customers, the EMS agencies. Okay, so I want to pause again for another poll. Chris, if you could bring up the poll, and we'll look at question number 3. Okay, in the polls, look at question number 3, which is, do you have interoperability? And if so, what form of interoperability? So if you're an EMS agency, then talking about what kind of interoperability you have available to you. If you're an EMS software vendor, then what kind of interoperability can you offer to your customers, or are you offering today to your customers? State offices, if any of you do have interoperability in place at a statewide level, then what kind of interoperability? And so first answer is no, we don't. Second is kind of via web portals. So what I mean here is that you, as an EMS agency, you've been provided access to some web portal that you can log into separately. It's not connected to your ePCR system, but you can go there and you can find some patient medical data. Or you provide your software provides a web portal that hospitals might log into separately, but it's not part of their EHR. Or as a vendor, that's the product that you offer that most of your customers are using today is some kind of web portal. The other option, yes, via direct exchange between EMS and hospital. That's the kind of connectivity I was talking about at the beginning, where as an agency, you've worked specifically with the hospital and you can connect to that hospital and share data. Or as an EMS software vendor, most of your customers today are using that sort of a connection, a one-to-one connection that you've helped them set up. And then the last option is yes, via a network. So either you're plugged into a QHIN, which is brand new stuff, or at least one of those implementers under the care quality framework, or you're connecting to an HIE. So there's someone in the middle that is brokering that data exchange between EMS and the other providers. So what I see for the results here is kind of an equal mix. So let's see, we're getting, so about a quarter of you don't have interoperability in place. About a quarter of you have some kind of web portal, a manual process. About a quarter of you have a direct connection between EMS and hospital. And then a little less, 20%, have a connection that goes through a network, like a health information network or health information exchange. Okay, well, that's interesting to see. And my guess would be, and I guess what I would encourage going forward is that we are working towards those network-based exchanges. Okay, great. All right, so let's talk about these networks. You know, so let's say, okay, you sign up with a network. That's great. You're an EMS software vendor, and you've signed up with a network, whether it's, you know, pre-TEFCA stuff under care quality, or it's through a QHIN under TEFCA. Still, as an EMS software vendor, you have to implement some certain standards. You know, none of this is magic. If you're going to connect to a network, you've got to be able to actually talk protocols and standards of that network. So what standards are used by the networks? I want to just give you an overview of a couple of standards bodies, I'll call them, that you could run into as you're talking about interoperability. First, Health Level 7, or HL7. HL7 is a standards development organization. They're technically recognized as such, and they develop standards for healthcare data. Within HL7, you'll often hear about these different versions of HL7. So V2, HL7 V2 is still very common today, especially inside the walls of a hospital. If you see HL7 V2 data, it's that delimited text data that has a bunch of caret characters in it. HL7 V3 is XML, and that data is usually transported through SOAP web service connections. HL7 V3 is really the most widely implemented set of standards as we look at the networks. So you might see a lot of V2 within a hospital, but then the hospital will communicate with the network using HL7 V3 and exchange documents that are XML based. And then the new HL7 family or generation of standards is called FHIR, Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. And that uses JavaScript object notation more predominantly, and REST APIs instead of SOAP web service APIs. Little lighter weight protocols that are a little more modern to exchange data. FHIR also brings some other interesting changes to how the data is structured that I won't get into today. So that's HL7. Then you may or may not have heard of IHE, which stands for Integrating the Healthcare Enterprise. IHE is sometimes called a standards development organization. They're, I guess you could call them like a standards collector. So the big thing that IHE does is they provide profiles. Profiles are collections of HL7 standards and other standards all brought together to solve a specific interoperability problem or use case. So an IHE might have a profile that says, here's how we're going to do document exchange. This is how we're going to send documents from one provider to another provider. And then they'll say within that profile, use these HL7 standards, use these other standards from other standards development organizations, maybe some standards related to making the HTTP connection, to implementing the security certificates that are needed to secure that connection, and so on. So they bundle these standards together in a profile and say, this is how you'll actually use all the standards out there to solve this particular problem. So as we look at HL7 standards and IHE profiles that are being used, really as we look at the networks today, they're all using IHE profiles, which of course are predominantly built on HL7 standards. So let's go back to our workflow here. We look at EMS responding to the patient. So what we're seeing here is if you need to get the patient's medical history, you're going to do an IHE cross-community patient discovery or an IHE patient demographics query. So those are a couple of IHE profiles that would be implemented by a software vendor to look up a patient and try to figure out who they are. Then to get some medical records on that patient, you would use the IHE cross-enterprise document sharing profile. And a key part of that, the payload that you would probably be looking at would be HL7 consolidated clinical document architecture documents. Those are HL7 version 3 XML documents. When you take the patient to the hospital, then you'll use, again, the cross-enterprise document sharing profile from IHE. And whoops, sorry for getting the text on top of the patient there. You're probably going to share an HL7 consolidated clinical document architecture document to the hospital. Now, as we know, EMS software vendors can build a NEMSIS patient care report in the NEMSIS XML structure. So what we're saying here is when that report goes to the hospital, it needs to be in a structure the hospital recognizes, and that's probably going to be HL7 CCDA. Within the consolidated clinical document architecture, there's about a dozen different document types. One of those is a continuity of care document. So that might be one option for EMS, that they could format their EMS report as a continuity of care document. The form that we're actually seeing the most of today, but it would be great to see us kind of mature more and move on from this, is unstructured document. So the EMS software, or as it connects over the network and sends data to the hospital, it's sending an HL7 clinical document architecture document. But if you were to look inside that document, all it really is a header and then a bunch of PDF data. So it's really just sending a PDF using the HL7 CDA structure. And that PDF, of course, is not really parsable. You can't say, let's pick out the systolic blood pressure or whatever else. So we're looking at how we can improve this part of the flow and get more structured data going to the hospitals. And then finally, for the outcomes, when you get after the patient has been seen in the hospital, that's also going to be an IHE cross-enterprise document sharing request from EMS to the network. And you'll probably get an HL7 CCDA back. Could be a continuity of care document or a discharge summary. And we even see the use of referral notes and progress notes. These are all part of those dozen or so document types within the consolidated clinical document architecture. So a variety of types that could be gotten back from the hospital, but those types are all well documented and can be parsed. That's a brief overview of kind of what we're seeing on the technical level in terms of the documents that get shared back and forth. All right, so yeah, we've covered a lot in the task force over the last year. Our next steps are to identify the operational and clinical information that needs to be shared in each step. So we've identified the standards that are going to be used to transfer the data back and forth, and even the standards that dictate what the content of that data is or how it's structured. But this question is, okay, what does EMS actually need to know about the patient's medical history? What does the hospital staff need to know about their incoming patient? And what does EMS need to know about the outcome of that patient from the hospital from a clinical and operational perspective? And then we want to match up what they need to know with what the actual data elements are in the standards that are out there today. And then create resources for transforming data between the NEMSIS XML standard and CCDA or the other data formats that are going to be that we're going to encounter. So that's what we're hoping to accomplish over the next few months as we kind of wrap up the final work of the task force. Okay. I'm going to change to the National Database Outcomes Challenge. But before I do that, I want to just see if there are any questions on stuff I've shared so far. So if you do have a question, I think you can raise your hand, and I'd be happy to answer any questions at this point. Okay, I do see that Mike asked if we'll be providing a copy of the slides in a PDF, and yeah, I can find a way to get these slides distributed. Okay, let's see, any hands up? Don't see any. Okay. All right, great. Well, I hope that that information so far has been helpful for you to just kind of catch up on all the stuff we've done over the past year with interoperability and figuring out the paths forward. I think there's some good options out there to really see some progress in the near future. All right, switching gears, this last topic for today, the National Database Outcomes Challenge. Okay, maybe you've all seen this slide that I've shared in several venues. In 2022, hospital outcomes were recorded on 1.4% of patient care reports in the national database where a patient was treated and transported by EMS. That's up from 1.2% in 2021, and we'll run the numbers for 2023 in about a month or so from now. We're just kind of waiting for the last of the 2023 data to come in. So that's not great at all. I mean, when you have millions of records, you can still kind of, look at the thousands, right, that might have some outcomes in them, but it's not much at all. So we're trying to make some improvements here and make sure that where EMS agencies are getting outcomes back from hospitals, that outcome data is actually making it into the NEMSIS XML data that they send to their state and then onto the national database. Okay, so let's bring up one more. Oh, let's see, Chris, I hope I got this question to you for the poll. No, I didn't. Sorry. There was a poll question I meant to put in place and I forgot, overlooked it. So answer this in your head. My question is, are you getting hospital outcome data? And the options are no, we're not. Or yes, but it's not coming into our ePCR system, like it's somewhere else, we have to go look for it. Or yes, it's in our PCR system. We're getting outcome data, it's coming right in, attached to our, or at least connected in some way to our patient care reports. So if you are getting hospital outcome data, then I have an invitation for you. I'd like you to contact me. So this is particularly for EMS agencies and for software vendors. I've talked to so many EMS agencies over the past year who have said, yeah, we're getting outcome data. And I have a data extract from the National EMS database that was produced for me for this project that shows me by agency across the country what percentage of their records have hospital outcome data. And so I'll go look for that agency, and they say they're getting outcome data, but when I look in the national database, I see that they either have none of their PCRs have outcome data, or a very low percentage of their PCRs have outcome data. The same thing has gone as I've talked with software vendors who say, yeah, we've got connections, all over the country getting outcome data back for our customers. And then I look in this data extract, which is broken down by software vendor, and the numbers I see just aren't matching up. That I'm seeing very low numbers compared to what they're telling me they're getting in terms of outcome data. So what I'd like to do is invite you, if you're getting hospital outcome data, to contact me. I'll give you my email address on the final slide here in a minute. And I can check your agency or your software in the national database and see what percentage of your records have outcome data in the national database. And if those numbers don't jive very well, then we can work together to figure out where the gap is. Anecdotally, as I've talked with both vendors and agencies, one gap that we've seen is that, of course, hospital outcome data comes in after, often several days after you've treated the patient. So what happens is EMS does their patient care report, they send it to their state system, the state sends it on to national. A few days later, the outcome data comes in, the EMS agency gets the outcome data, but there's no trigger in their software to then resend the patient care report, the NEMSIS XML export with the outcome data included to the state. So the EMS agency got the outcome data, it just never got triggered to send to the state. I think that's an easy gap to fix. There may be other gaps too, like that maybe you're getting the data, it's coming into your EPCR system, but your EPCR system doesn't truly have the ability to actually incorporate that data into a NEMSIS XML export and get it out to the state. That could be a gap that would need to be addressed as well. So I'd like to work with you to identify the gaps, and then you can work on getting those fixed, whether it's, it's usually, I think, going to the vendor to help implement something to fix that gap. And then I can look at the data again later and we can see if we made a difference. I think that just we can get some of the low-hanging fruit and make an increase in the percentage of outcomes, percentage of records in the national database that have outcomes. All right. Yeah, Mike, thanks for that comment. There may be a perception that the EMS agency is only allowed one bite at the apple to submit an NEMSIS report. Like you're only allowed to submit it once and you can never submit updates. And that has been an issue in the past because there were some state systems that didn't do well handling those updates and would see them as new records and created duplicates. Now, as we move to NEMSIS 3.5, we have a unique identifier for each record that makes it much easier for the receiving systems to not accidentally create duplicate records when they receive those updates. So I hope that we can see some good forward progress here. All right, so I'm going to flip to the contact info slide and open it back up for questions in a moment. My contact info on the left. So again, if your agency is getting outcome data, contact me. I'll look it up in the national database and we'll see how it's doing. If you're an EMS software vendor and you know that you have a bunch of customers that are receiving outcome data, same thing, I'll look them up or I'll look up your product in the national database and we'll see how it's doing. Also welcome to call or text me. Okay, on the right-hand side, this is the jumping off point for interoperability from NEMSIS. Go to nemsis.org/using EMS data/interoperability. Or go to nemsis.org and then hit the menu for using EMS data, and you'll see a menu item for interoperability, or snap the QR code here. The interoperability page on the NEMSIS website is kind of a jumping off point to everything that's being done with interoperability. So you'll see the EMS Data Summit that was held in December in Washington, D.C. There's the recording of that summit. You'll see information about the task force and information for joining the Google group for the task force. So you'll get the emails about what's going on there. You'll also see links to a GitHub repository where resources are being compiled for interoperability. And in particular, there's a wiki site with that repository where I'm writing up, as we learn in the task force and kind of collect this information, I'm writing it up on these wiki pages. And so those wiki pages become a good place to get just a quick ramp up and primer on EMS interoperability. So I'd encourage you to use that NEMSIS page as the jumping off point for learning more. Okay, let's see if there are any questions from the audience. Feel free to raise hand or put something in the chat. So pretty quiet so far. Does anyone have any questions about, how they would proceed with interoperability, or what their next steps would be? Any of that? Mike, let's see if we can get you. Um, yeah,
Can you
see
hear
if
me?
can you. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, great. Oh, great talk, Josh. Thank you. I had a question. So I attended the Data Summit 2.0, and I guess I needed some clarification. It seems that the new paradigm in data exchange is that it's a potluck. You bring something, then you can receive something. Now, is that under TEFCA? Is that just with the QHIMs? So if I am providing information, data to my hospitals when I drop off a patient. And just by that act, are they then required to give me data back?
That's a great question. There's a requirement within the existing networks and under TEFCA that those who connect to the network they must commit to not only ask for data, but to give data when it's asked of them under certain purposes. In the care quality framework, there's actually an exception that's been carved out. And that exception is that if an EMS agency is connecting to a network under the care quality framework, they do not have to respond to requests for data if they have a mechanism in place where they are delivering their data to the hospital that they're transporting the patient to. Now, that exception doesn't apply, for example, to community paramedicine, where you're not delivering a patient to a hospital. So it just applies to those transports. So EMS can come in and not have to be required to respond to queries from others because of the fact that they're delivering their report, they're pushing their report. So TEFCA does not, I don't think TEFCA has that exception. I think it's been talked about. But I think going forward, it makes sense for EMS to kind of understand that or prepare for the idea of being a responder, being able to respond to these queries. Now, your question, I think, was more on the hospital side. So yes, if the hospital has connected to the network, then they have committed to not only ask for data, but to provide data in response to queries. However, the network, the framework says they have to respond to queries for treatment purposes. So that means EMS is going on a call, they're trying to treat a patient, they need medical history. Yeah, they can put a query into the network, and people, the other network participants who have data for that patient, they must respond because that's a query for treatment purposes. However, the requirement's not there for operations purposes, which is the purpose that EMS would indicate if they want hospital outcomes after the call has happened. So they're no longer treating the patient, but they need it for their operations. There's not a requirement for the others to respond to those queries. So it comes down to that query purpose. And that's one of the key issues that we're trying to make sure it gets addressed as the framework moves forward. Other questions? Okay, well, I hope that this has been a helpful primer for those of you who haven't been involved in the task force to just kind of see where we're at today, and hopefully it's somewhat encouraging to you that I think we've got some great stuff coming forward, and we have some paths forward for EMS. We definitely still have roadblocks like that operations query I was talking about just now. Definitely still got to figure out, how to get everyone or what what way everyone is going to connect into these networks, but some good stuff coming. So thank you everyone for your time today and for joining this webinar. Chris, you have anything for us?
Actually, you know what, Josh? If now that we've had this wonderful talk, and if someone on the call has now been inspired to want to participate in the interoperability group, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, head to that NEMSIS interoperability page. There's a link there to the Google group. Get signed up in that Google group, request membership, and you'll start getting the emails. It's not a barrage of emails. It's like a couple emails a month, but that'll include the announcements about the upcoming monthly meetings.
Perfect. And you mentioned it, but also on that one, there is a playlist. So if you do want to catch up from the very beginning, you can go and see where the conversation has been and where it's going with the rest of the group. So it's a great resource. Recommend everybody go and check that out if you're interested in getting involved in this group, and I think you should. Awesome, Josh. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. We will work on uh, getting your slides out to everyone who asked for those. And in the meantime, if you want to be notified about this type of training, the V3 calls, and other events that are going on with NEMSIS, you can head over to the NEMSIS website, and you'll see in the upper right-hand corner there is a button that says "Sign up for alerts from NEMSIS," and you can also find us on social media on Facebook, Twitter X, and LinkedIn, and we do post things, notices for events and stuff that's going on with NEMSIS on those channels as well. And of course, on YouTube, where you can see you can rewatch this video, or you can watch any of our previous trainings and the previous annual meetings, relive all your great memories from all the great NEMSIS information that we've collected over the years. With nothing else, I hope, thank you once again for coming and spending your time with us today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.